Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Welcome everyone to Clear Mountain's weekly Wednesday live stream, followed by a fun Zoom chat. Let me know if the sound is okay and if there's any problems in the video or other things. We'll begin as usual with a little bit of a meditation and just lightly guided, but mainly just to come to center. And if people, while we're meditating, any questions come up which you'd like to bring up in the session, then keep those in mind because we should have time for Q&A. Just begin by inviting yourself to be with the breath and just let it roll up and down your body. Up on the inhale and down on the exhale. Slowly. And just check in to see what's there right now. In your heart, in your mind from the day. And know that it's all welcome. It's all okay. Try to bring a gentle ethic of welcome and friendliness, a slight smile. Just allow yourself to rest for a bit with what's there. You can imagine awareness expanding out into the room around you, a gentle brightness, kindness, just pervading it, with room enough for you, for your breath, for any echoes of the day. You don't have to do anything you've been doing all day. Just be here for a time, for a few minutes. The sense of welcome and let things settle on their own. Breath, a gentle friend, an anchor. And if the mind draws away, then just recognize what drew you away, release it, return to this centered space. Relax, re-smile, so smile again, and then repeat. And emphasize that relaxing and re-smiling. Okay. So gently open your eyes, or you can continue to sit. In our tradition, sitting and listening are similar in terms of partaking of a Dhamma talk. This may not be a full-on Dhamma talk, though. There are some things I could talk about, but this is also a chance for people to type in questions and topics they'd like to discuss. We have some old friends on the chat. Hello, everyone. Yes, the Zoom room won't be open until 6:45. That's when we start that, so a little longer. Until things do begin, or questions do begin coming in, I did want to tie together two concepts that I've found meaningful in recent weeks. One is the concept of something I've spoken about before called the lost languages. And so for those of you who don't know, there's a famous marriage book called The Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Four of the love languages, and these are ways you express love or receive it to a partner. They include giving, kind words, beneficial help and quality time, and physical acts of love too, which don't align with the four qualities you find in the suttas, which do align actually. So in the suttas, there is a list of four powers of benevolence, the Buddha calls them, called the Sanghahavatu. And the commentaries say they are the reason that the Buddha had soft hands. Actually, the suttas say that. And basically, these are almost a mirror image of four of the love languages. It's giving, dana, kind words, payavacha, beneficial help, atacharya, and consistency, samanatata. And what I thought of recently was just the fact that these love languages are our love languages because, and they are particularly meaningful to us because they fill a particular hunger which we have. And so I think each love language actually corresponds to a lack, to a hunger which we in particular have, namely to a loss language and a way that we experience dukkha, suffering in our lives particularly. So if our love language is we would like to receive gifts, dana, then our loss language might be this fear of scarcity. If our love language is kind words, we like to receive praise, then our lost language might be fear of not being valued or looked on as good enough. If our love language is beneficial help, then our lost language might be fear of not being good enough, not being able to hold everything together. And if our love language is consistency, then our lost language might be a fear of chaos and uh, things not being in order. And just to note that, as is the case with dukkha and craving, feeding craving rarely actually satisfies it. It never, in the long term, it only makes it bigger. So each of these lost languages, to really address the root of that hunger in us, to address our root of craving, our root of suffering, the particular language we speak our suffering in, our lost language, one doesn't have to try to satisfy that hunger, but rather to uh, give from the hunger. And what that means is, one of the powerful aspects of dana, of giving, is that when we give, it's a concrete affirmation embodied that we have more than we need. It's a statement of wealth. Um, so you really see this firsthand going on alms as a monk in Thailand, especially coming from a rich Western country, is there's a sense of like, who am I to receive food from these, some very poor villagers? And yet you miss something, because the uh, when someone from a poor Thai village gives a lump of rice, it's an affirmation that today they actually have more than they need. It's an affirmation of wealth internally. And to reverse the ethics so common in the world of, um, a rich nation, and those from it kind of being the philanthropists to others, and the power dynamic that is inherent in that, to reverse that for a mourning is not a bad thing. So just to say that the act of giving is a very powerful way to actually fight against the uh, craving and hunger inherent in a lost language. I've compared it before to a black hole, where if you put more matter in a black hole, it just gets heavier. So just to say that when you pick out your love language, and therefore your lost language, the love language you're most likely to receive and therefore most like to receive, and therefore the lost language which is deepest in you, to make a very concrete determination to daily and weekly give from that lost language, give from as it, make it your love language too, in terms of your giving love language, because this is a way of really powerfully, concretely giving it up. So if your love language that you like to receive is giving, gifts, then, which means your lost language might be fear of scarcity, then to make it a practice every day to give something to someone. And I've mentioned this before, there's a practice called the Saraniya practice in Sri Lanka, where before you eat, you always give something for someone else to eat. And there are so many opportunities to give, not just food, but anything in a day, but especially food. Cookies to people at work, or a bowl of soup, or a cup of soup to someone on the street. So to make this really a concrete act, if your lost language is fear of not being praised enough, meaning you like to receive kind words, then make it your challenge that lost language by doing acts of good in secret. Make it a practice to once a day do an anonymous act of kindness and really not speak about it. It can be something very little, but watch that part of your heart that wants to say your name and hint at what you did, and then see if just once a day you can kind of put it aside. And maybe if you need a little help, you can tell a different spiritual friend about it, but leave it, if you can really just leave it quietly there just for you and the angels and the Dhamma and who knows, yourself to know, then that's enough. If your lost language is fear of not being able to hold everything together, not having enough energy and time to meet all your commitments, then can you make it a practice to once a day really give up what you want to do and do something completely in the service of another, and give a substantial amount of time to that, and watch how that ethic of giving and wealth actually makes you feel like you have more time. There's really something that happens. There's a magic um, to that. One of the really wonderful suttas on communal harmony in the canon is called the Chula Gosinga Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. And one of the powerful phrases that sticks with you in it is Venerable Anuruddha saying, the Buddha asks how he gets along so well. And Venerable Anuruddha says, constantly I say, why don't I give up what I want to do and do what these other venerables want to do instead? And then finally, if your lost language is fear of chaos, things unwinding, not being held together, can you make your giving, can you challenge that by once a day, really finding a place, a little bit of surrender. So really, doing, this goes sort of similar to the previous one, but really doing something that another person wants to do and like letting go and surrendering to that. And that can be as simple as letting them pick dinner, what restaurant they want to go to, but notice where you're getting hung up on and give to that. So what I wanted to mention is that can be a lot to keep in mind every day, trying to get that checklist off for your particular lost language. But recently, I was listening to a beautiful interview on the Sabbath. And in Buddhism, we have a Sabbath. It's called the Uposatha. And it's typically on the full, new, and half moon days, about once a week. But I find it can be easiest to align with the solar week or the work week, basically, is if you find your Saturdays are a good day to really put aside a little time for practice, then that's a good day for you. If your Sundays are better, then fair enough. We've been trying to encourage our community here to make Saturdays a Sabbath of sorts, since it's when we have the communal gatherings. It's a time for everyone to get together. And then it's easy to do one thing that is often recommended for the Sabbath, which is to hold the 8 precepts into the afternoon and not have the dinner that you usually would have. And there's a big lunch, so you're all right. That's not essential, but it's can be helpful. Other elements of the 8 precepts that people often take during this day include turning off, not looking at entertainment. And that can just include turning off the phone if you want to take an extra step. Not sleeping on higher luxurious sleeping places. So it actually can be very helpful to sleep on a thermarest or something. It sounds silly, but it's a pretty powerful recollection of what you're there for that day. And just finding other ways to make practice a bit more prominent, one day a week, one day a week. In this interview, it was saying we so often, for the rest of our lives, trade time for conquering space. We trade our time for the sake of conquering the external world. And once a week, the Sabbath or the Uposatha is a chance for us to stop with our constant seeking to conquer space and instead give ourselves time, that framing of a week, and to rest. And I think that in terms of this giving of the way you give from your lost language and challenge it, if you can't find a way to do it really well every day, then can you do it once a week on that Sabbath day? Can you make it a practice once a week to cook a meal for a friend, in the morning and take them breakfast or something? Do it for lunch. If your love language or lost language aligns with that, can you make it a habit to once a week take your Sabbath and take a half an hour to go just talk or spend time with someone who you know needs it, to give a call to the person who you know is lonely? Once a week, can we discipline ourselves to challenge particularly our fear and our particular thread of dukkha? So I think that structure is important. And if people want help with holding an Uposatha day, on our Discord server, which the links are on the website, we have an invitation and instructions for how to um, basically also bring in a confession to your Uposatha today, where we have a confession ritual you can take on with a partner. And just this is what monks do, and nuns is once a week, or sorry, once every 2 weeks, you just talk to someone about the places in your life where you could have been a bit better on, and maybe those where you did well. And the psychological literature is very supportive of that. So I hope you all find time in a week or every 2 weeks at the very least to make more space for this. Great. So we have time for some questions now. The community may benefit from reflections on how attachment can hinder our ability to be compassionate. Yeah. There's a Kachetism in which the Buddha, or Venerable Sariputta, I can't remember which, but it's in the Digha Nikaya, and he goes through a list where he asks these novices, what is the one, what is the two, what is the three, what is the four? And many of the numbers, sort of a question and answer game to get the teachings down almost. So, the fours might be the Four Noble Truths, what you expect. The three, maybe the three characteristics. But the one, what is the one, is very interesting. And the Buddha says the one is the fact that all things feed, all beings feed. And this acknowledgement from the Buddha that our default setting is to feed is helpful, because it shows us where we're at, and it shows us the importance of cultivating an internal happiness not dependent on feeding. And that's what meditation is about, and a good sense of sila. There are different levels of happiness outlined in the canon, and there is amisa sukha, which is worldly, fleshly happiness. Happiness or pleasure derived from the six sense bases, the feeding off of them. But then there's niramisa sukha, which is happiness, sort of spiritual happiness. And that's happiness from samadhi, from loving kindness, from a sense of morality and uprightness. That's a wealth that is internally generated, and can shift your ethic from one of automatically feeding to one of blessing the world, and change your orientation completely. But it requires the cultivation of an internal resource. And I would say another thing to mention here is that we often don't realize how much we feed off of others until it's compromised. And I think one particularly interesting thing to see is the Buddha lays out the flavors of our feeding. They're the types of upadana: craving, feeding, clinging. Sorry, not craving, but clinging or feeding. And those are clinging to rites and rituals, to sensual desire, to self, I believe, and to views. And it just can be very useful when anger comes up, see which of those flavors of feeding is being compromised, because usually there's one particular one. And that's helpful because you really see what you're depending on. Is it is a certain structure of how things are supposed to work? Is it the fact that you wanted that thing and now you don't get it? Are you angry because suddenly they're thinking of you in a way different than you wish you were thought of? And that's very powerful. Notice what happens when someone blames you for something you didn't do. And can you put it down? And yeah, and I think when you see that explicit reaction, you see how brittle our goodwill can be. Because the moment the loved one doesn't act like you want them to act, or does something that compromises some feeding, the anger comes, and they are an other very quickly. But then even in our daily lives, when it's not being explicitly compromised, just to notice how when we are able to cultivate this sense of wealth, internal beauty, and that outflow of goodwill begins, that's real love because you can't love something you're feeding off of. Not truly, not in the same moment. And, it's always a mix for us. Like people we love and are attached to, we have moments of seeing them as real people. And then you have moments where you feel the tentacles of self grab them. And that's interesting to note. And for me, I find this very distinctly and concretely with people in my family, is if I think of them as, often um, just this or that family member, it's almost like they're too close. There's too much self, especially say they have a different view on something than I do. But if you think, okay, they're a friend in birth, aging, and death, and in the spiritual path, they have their own journey, that slight distance unwraps the tentacles of feeding and lets you step back a little bit and actually have love, more love. There's room between you for a fresh wind of met to blow. It's almost like loving kindness is this string. And if something's too close to you, the string is slack and there's no note. But if you stretch it out just a little bit, just give them a little bit of breathing room, then the string is taut enough that you can pluck it and there's this resonant note of love. And that's counterintuitive because you'd think the closer you draw someone, the more you love them. But our circumference of self swallows those near us. Sometimes it's helpful to have them be at a bit of a distance so that they don't get drawn in. Could you explain about sense consciousness in the aggregates, please? It seems tightly connected with the sankharas. Thanks. Yeah, I think it is. It's interesting trying to distinguish the aggregates from each other. So the aggregates, for those who don't know, are the elements that comprise a human personality. And basically the points of clinging we take as self. So form, our bodies, feelings, the affective tone of experience, perception, um, sankhara, which are like mental formations often. And that can be constructs of emotion, ways of acting, etc., and consciousness, vijnana. And the Buddha says that the aggregates are conjoined, not disjoined. And that's helpful because they are all mixed together in a sense. Sometimes they all touch one another and bleed over. There's sort of kind of can be a bit of a Venn diagram. That being said, what is interesting is in the commentaries, form became separated from the other four. So our bodies became kind of its own thing, and then the others were thought of as nama, mental constituents, and were kind of separated out in their own group. But in the suttas, the bifurcation is different. The Buddha allows consciousness a place of separation and unique stature, whereas the other four are taken a bit more as a group, including the body. So that's a different separation. And what I think it recognizes is, you know, that consciousness to some extent has the ability to know the other aggregates, and hold them within it. Um, and that's not to say that it can't also know itself. There's sort of a, you get into this infinite regression when you look for the stable seed of truth that underlies one of these. There's a famous saying of I think someone was asking a certain individual from a tribe what the world rested on. And they said, the earth rests on a turtle. And then so the person was like, okay, what does that turtle rest on? And the person was like, well, it's on another turtle. And the scientist asked, okay, what about that turtle? And he said, no, it's turtles all the way down. So all to say that consciousness is raised up as being able to hold the others. But I think taking that into a dogmatic regression trying to look for, or a sort of regression trying to look for some sort of transcendent consciousness that you could reify or conceptualize as the ultimate unconditioned or some element of experience like that. The Buddha stopped before you get there. And yet there seems to be a functional distinction because sometimes it's true consciousness and how we conceive of things is tied up with sankhara. A really quintessential element of sankhara, mental formations, is intention. We intend. And often with consciousness, there is this intent to find something, to, maybe we go into the day angry. So, our consciousness is kind of going out there looking for something to be angry about. I don't know how doctrinal this is all, but it aligns with my experience. But as we meditate, that intention, the element of consciousness does get more refined to the point where there's less intertwining with sankhara. There's less intention, and it can be a lot more just resting in a knowing. And I think that's why it's separated out, is because it can move towards that place of a bit more clarity and unentangled, and become unentangled more from the other khandhas. It's also worth noting that terms like vijnana, consciousness, are used differently in different contexts by the Buddha. So sometimes he might be very explicitly, well, anyways, I won't go into it, but you may find different places where he's emphasizing different aspects of consciousness. Oh, I'm glad. Join us on Zoom after. It's a nice place where we can all talk more as well. Could you speak on having non-ill will, but at the same time not liking the person personally? Yeah, I think we've all been here. We talk a lot about metta in practice circles in the West, loving kindness. So much of the work that undergirds real metta is the work of adosa, which means non-ill will, non-anger. And specifically the three sub-elements of right intention on the Noble Eightfold Path the Buddha lays out are intention for renunciation, for non-harming, for non-ill will, abhayapada. And so I don't think actually adosa it's a different translation of a different term, but it's all related. And I find that that's where a lot of the work goes in, because we are much more angry than we think. And to acknowledge that we are half angel and half demon, and to see and know that part of ourselves, which is so frustrated. And, because we've been trying to be happy for how many years? And it just, for most of us, it's, worked partially, but we're just not quite there until we're awakened. And that's frustrating. That's frustrating. And so I think the same goes for people in our lives. Like, often where a lot of your intention will have to be applied is finding where your anger is latching on. Because there's going to be someone, always a nemesis at work or at home, and acknowledging that that is a great gift, because that is, your anger is going to latch on somewhere. And to be given a place, a mirror to see it, to confront it, to work with it is so helpful. And a lot of your life will be working with it, because anger is the most easy thing, almost maybe the most easy thing for self to crystallize around. So it's the thing that'll first come up when you wake up. It's the thing, ill will often isn't an explicit eruption. It's more this subtle hum through a day. Just we abide. I think it's that interesting term when the Buddha says to abide in goodwill. because that sense of living in something, we live in our ill will. We just kind of live there most of the time, often for many of us, for long periods of the sort of low grade hum of ill will. So just first raising up the person you dislike on a pedestal as a great gift, because there it is. This is something so significant for your heart to confront and develop patience and care around. Um, and then ways of, not having ill will, even as you acknowledge that you don't really necessarily like them. One is there's a place for avoiding them a little bit. The Buddha allows that. There's in the Sabbasava Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 2, there are dangers to be avoided, are defilements to be um, uh, cured or abandoned through avoiding. So it's okay not to put yourself in the same room as the person you're annoyed with constantly. Wait until you've got a measure of mindfulness, of solidity in your body. But then when you are with them, to first think of them as a friend in birth, aging, and death. Remember that you've at the heart of it, that's what they are. And a really helpful reflection or visualization for this is imagining holding their hand on their deathbed and holding their hand when they're 5 years old, and just remember that part of them. And the other is, and bring that into the meditation often. Giving them gifts can be very helpful. So if you kind of need to counteract by really giving them some things, that can be helpful. And acknowledging that you're no longer in this game of samsara for the sake of liking and disliking people. And probably if there's a strong dislike, from a Buddhist perspective, there's the idea you may have had karma together in the past. And there's something to be said for knowing that you don't have to cure these old karmic ties right away. Sometimes it's enough to endure, because a lot of being with a version like that isn't necessarily figuring it out completely, although it helps sometimes to try to figure out some of the conditions behind it and the causes. But sometimes just acknowledging, like, okay, my experience with this person is going to be a little difficult, and can I just can I just not act on that ever? Can this be my practice of effacement, of humility, of just not expressing that? And it can be a huge act of will over a long period of time, but that is a powerful practice. And if that is your main practice for a year, to be with the coworker or the boss or the spouse or the child who's really just making you very angry, and you're able to not really say anything unkind, or not much, or not often, that is a good use of a year. And you will find you come out of that with so much more breadth of heart. So yeah, think of them as a shard of a bodhisattva come down to help you. There's in the Mahayana, there's the concept that the bodhisattvas can sort of break off a piece of their mind and send it down. So to help you learn. So your boss or your other person can be someone come to help you learn. I've been working on compassion and releasing judgment and attachment with some recent success. Yay, it's been hard work. I wonder why it's so hard. Why isn't it natural? Yeah, I'm really glad that you found success in that. And there are elements of this path which are very painful and difficult, or very difficult at times. I do think it's useful to compare the kind of suffering we encounter on this path to what it was like 5 years ago for us. Because we can have, we always have this idea and this ideal, and, inevitably the present will fall short. But if you really realistically look at what suffering was like for you 5 years before that, the suffering we encounter now, it's different. There's a line at the end of Dependent Origination where it says, you know, it ends this whole 12 links of creating suffering with sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. And I just remember a few years into practice, suddenly I realized the word despair no longer was relevant to my experience in the same way. Like, things still suck. There's days that just are difficult, unpleasant. I call practice the slow boil. But that real sense of despair, I'd almost forgotten what that ripping of the heart feels like, where when you really believe you are the khandhas and then they break, or they're not good enough, or your body's not good enough, or you're not good enough for the person who loves you. I remember watching Othello as a layman, and just the suffering contained in that play. I think it is the clearest depiction of what despair looks like that I've seen in a play. And to take joy in the fact that, you know, there is suffering on this path, but it's within alignment and it's for a purpose. And that sense of it being worthwhile is so profound. And I think we forget what it's like to not have that. So yeah, it's hard, but you know, it's also beautiful, and there's so many blessings along the way. And I know your question wasn't implying anything else, but I have to constantly remind myself too. So good luck. Yes, it's helpful to have good spiritual friends as well. Okay, everyone. That's the end of our time, but we have a Zoom session now. For those who want, I'm pasting the link in the chat. The room will be closed for another 60 seconds. I've got to log off and open it up. Those who can join us there for a more intimate discussion. And you can also join us on Saturday. It'll be great to see everyone at St. Mark's or online. And I hope everyone is well, and take care. You can also find that link, by the way, halfway down our webpage.